I never thought it would happen to me. Betrayal was something that happened to other people, the unlucky ones, the ones who didn't see the signs. But as I stood there in our kitchen, the faint glow of Megan's phone lighting up the counter, I felt the cold grip of suspicion tighten around my chest. There it was, a single message: "Can't wait to see you tonight." She just told me she was too exhausted to go out, claiming she needed an early night after her workout with Sean. The usual excuses: the gym, the personal trainer, and the need for self-care. I had never questioned it before. Megan had always been independent, and I respected her space. But now, as I stared at that message, everything felt wrong. I wasn't stupid. Was Sean, the personal trainer. I could feel it in my gut. A guy who'd always been around, talking fitness plans and diets, but whose smiles lingered just a second too long when Megan walked by. I'd chalked it up to professional charm, the kind that keeps clients happy and coming back. I wanted to believe that, but now the cracks were showing. And that message? It was more than a crack, it was a fracture running through everything I thought we had. Megan walked into the room, her hair still damp from the shower, dressed in the old college sweatshirt I loved seeing her in. She smiled at me like nothing was wrong, like she hadn't just lied through her teeth about being tired. I quickly pocketed her phone, pretending to scroll through my own. My pulse was hammering, but I kept my expression blank. "You okay, babe?" she asked, her voice soft, too soft. The same voice she'd used 1,000 times to calm me after a long day in court. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Just tired. Long day." She didn't notice. Or maybe she did but didn't care. Either way, she kissed me on the cheek and headed upstairs, her phone forgotten in the shuffle. I heard the bedroom door close softly behind her, leaving me alone in the silence of our perfect kitchen, the place where we had hosted so many dinners and shared so many laughs. I stared at the empty room around me. I couldn't bring myself to follow her upstairs, to pretend like everything was fine. The evidence was there, right in front of me. And if there was one thing I was good at, it was dealing with evidence. I needed proof. Real proof. Something I could confront her with, something undeniable. I wasn't going to be the guy who threw around accusations and let the truth slip through my fingers. No, this had to be meticulous, planned, precise. If I was going to confront Megan, I needed to know every detail. I knew what I had to do. I made a call the next morning, hiring a private investigator, a guy I'd used a few times before for high-profile clients. Discreet, efficient. He didn't ask questions, he just got the job done. And in this case, the job was simple: find out if my wife was sleeping with her personal trainer. It didn't take long, just a few days of surveillance, and I had everything I needed. Photos, text records, and receipts from the hotel where they met. The affair was real. Megan and Sean, together, sneaking around like high school lovers behind my back. But I didn't confront her. Not yet. No, I was going to do this right. I wasn't going to be the angry husband screaming about betrayal. I was going to be the lawyer I was trained to be. I was going to take everything from her, just like she had taken everything from me. And the best part? She wouldn't even see it coming. It all started with a document. A simple financial agreement, one I convinced her we needed to sign for the future. She trusted me, of course. I was her husband, the man who always took care of the details. She signed without a second thought, not bothering to read the fine print, just like I knew she wouldn't. And with that signature, Megan had unknowingly sealed her fate. After Megan signed the papers, I allowed myself to breathe a little easier, but not too much. The hardest part was still ahead, waiting. Patience was never my strong suit. But in this case, it was necessary. I needed to play the part of the unsuspecting husband a little longer, needed to make sure she didn't catch on before everything was set in stone. She went about her days as if nothing had changed. Smiling, laughing, the perfect wife when she was with me, and yet every night, she found another excuse to be out late, to spend just a little more time at the gym, training with Sean. And every night, I held back the rage simmering beneath the surface, knowing it wasn't time to show my cards. I couldn't risk a confrontation, not yet. Instead, I focused on perfecting the trap. The financial documents she had signed were ironclad. If the affair ever came to light, Megan would be left with nothing. No house, no savings, no alimony. I had thought of every detail, every loophole she could try to slip through. The satisfaction came from knowing that while she thought she was sneaking around behind my back, I was building the case to end her life as she knew it. Still, there were moments when I wondered if she even suspected anything. Maybe a part of her felt guilty. After all, she hadn't admitted to the affair. Or maybe, and more likely, she thought I was just as clueless as she needed me to be. Her act never faltered, and neither did mine. One evening, about 2 weeks after she had signed the documents, we went to dinner at one of our favorite restaurants. A place we used to go for special occasions, back when things were good. She looked stunning, as always, dressed in a sleek black dress that hugged her figure just right. Her hair styled perfectly. I watched her across the table, thinking about how easy it had been for her to live this double life. It made me sick. "So," she said, sipping her wine, "I've been thinking. Maybe we should take a trip. Just the two of us. It's been a while, don't you think?" I smiled. She was trying, but this was just another part of the charade. A trip wouldn't change anything. "That sounds great," I replied, the lie coming easily. "Where do you want to go?" "Somewhere warm. The Caribbean maybe? We could get away for a week, just relax." I nodded as if I was considering it, though, in reality, I was planning when I would serve her the divorce papers. "Let's look into it. Maybe we could plan for next month." She smiled at me, and I could almost believe she still cared, but that smile didn't reach her eyes. It hadn't been for a long time. After dinner, we returned home, and I kissed her goodnight as she headed upstairs. I waited until she was asleep before slipping into my office. It was time to take the next step. The private investigator had already gathered enough evidence to destroy her. Photos, texts, phone records, it was all there, neatly compiled in a folder sitting on my desk. Everything I needed to confront her was in my hands, but I wasn't going to confront her in private. No, Megan didn't deserve that luxury. This was going to be public. I reached out to my lawyer the next morning, preparing the divorce papers. Everything was lined up perfectly. The documents would ensure that Megan walked away with nothing but her own guilt. No matter how much she tried to fight it, the evidence was overwhelming, and the legal trap was inescapable. All that was left was to wait for her to make the final move. I knew it was only a matter of time before she confessed, or maybe she wouldn't. Either way, I was ready. The moment she admitted to her affair, I would serve her the papers, and her life as she knew it would crumble around her. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about making her feel the weight of her betrayal. She had taken everything from me, and now I was going to return the favor. But I wasn't going to yell or scream. That wasn't my style. This was going to be slow and methodical, just like the way she had betrayed me. I slept soundly that night, knowing that soon, the life she had built on lies was about to collapse. The confession came sooner than I expected. It was late on a Thursday evening when Megan walked into my office, her face pale, her hands nervously wringing the hem of her sweater. I didn't look up right away, making her wait in the silence that filled the room. I knew this was it. She was going to tell me. "Ryan," her voice wavered, and that was enough to make me glance up from my desk. "What's going on?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. I could have pretended to be clueless, but that wasn't my style. Let her feel uncomfortable. Let her sweat. She hesitated, her eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape. "There's something I need to tell you." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The silence pressed her to continue. "I've been seeing someone," she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. There it was. The words hung in the air like a heavy cloud, but instead of the anger or heartbreak she might have expected, I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. "With Sean?" I asked, pretending it was just a guess. I couldn't help but twist the knife a little. Her eyes widened in shock, and she stumbled over her words. How did you?" "I'm not stupid, Megan," I interrupted, keeping my voice calm and collected. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice?" She looked like she wanted to run, to bolt out of the room and never come back. But I wasn't going to let her off that easily. I stood up, slowly, walking over to where she stood frozen in the doorway. "I've known for a while," I said, my tone almost conversational. "The late-night gym sessions, the secret phone calls, the hotel receipts. You weren't exactly subtle." Her face paled even more, and I could see her body start to shake as the realization of how deep her betrayal went sank in. "Ryan, I didn't mean for it to happen. It was a mistake." "A mistake?" I echoed, letting the word hang between us. "You've been sleeping with him for months." "That's not a mistake, Megan. That's a decision." Tears filled her eyes, and she reached for me as if hoping I would forgive her. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." I took a step back, out of her reach. letting the distance between us feel like a chasm. It's too late for apologies. I watched as she crumbled before me, her perfect image cracking just like I'd known it would. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, the moment when she realized how badly she'd screwed up. But what she didn't know was that this was just the beginning. "I'll pack my things," she whispered, already accepting her fate. She thought I would ask her to leave, that I would be the one begging for space. But she was wrong. "You're not going anywhere," I said, my voice hard. "Not yet." Her eyes flickered with confusion, but before she could ask, I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out the divorce papers, dropping them on the table between us with cold finality. What is this?" she asked, her voice shaky as she picked up the thick stack of documents. "It's everything you're about to lose," I said simply. The shock on her face as she flipped through the papers was almost satisfying. I watched as her fingers paused over the section detailing the financial arrangements. The realization slowly dawning on her that she had signed away everything, her assets, her claim to the house, even the savings account she thought was half hers. "This can't be real," she gasped, looking up at me with wide eyes. You tricked me into signing this." "I didn't trick you," I corrected. "You just didn't bother to read the fine print. That's on you." Her face twisted with disbelief and panic, her hands shaking as she dropped the papers back onto my desk. "You can't do this, Ryan." "I already have," I said, my voice calm and measured, just like it was in court when I knew I had the case won before it even started. She stared at me, a mix of anger, fear, and helplessness swirling in her expression. "You're going to leave me with nothing?" "That's right. But I loved you," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "I made a mistake, but we can work through this." I laughed, not a full laugh, but a dark chuckle that held no humor. "You made your choices, Megan. And now, you'll live with the consequences." I turned and left her standing there, broken, lost in the very house she thought was half hers. But it wasn't anymore. It didn't take long for the news to spread. In our world, divorce was common, but the details of this one were scandalous enough to get everyone talking. Megan, the beautiful, successful wife of Ryan Walters, cheated on him with her personal trainer and got caught. And not only that, she was left with nothing. My lawyer handled the divorce proceedings effortlessly. Megan tried to fight back at first, scrambling to find some way to reverse the damage, but the documents were airtight. She had no legal ground to stand on, and she knew it. The settlement was finalized within weeks, and just like that, Megan was out of my life. But not out of public view. Word got out fast. Friends, colleagues, acquaintances, everyone knew what had happened. Megan's reputation was shattered, and with it, her social standing. The same people who used to flock to her now avoided her like a sinking ship. And the once perfect life she had built started to crumble around her. Sean, of course, was nowhere to be found. As soon as the news broke, he disappeared, probably realizing he'd hitched his wagon to the wrong star. He didn't want to be associated with the woman who had just lost everything, and I couldn't have been more pleased to see him run like the coward he was. I watched as Megan's world collapsed in on itself. She lost the house, the money, the lifestyle she had become so accustomed to. And while she tried to put on a brave face, I knew she was struggling. There were whispers that she was staying with a friend, barely making ends meet. But I didn't feel pity. Not for her. This was the price she had to pay for betraying me. I moved on quickly, or at least that's what I let people think. I focused on my career, my work taking up most of my time. I wasn't interested in dating, not yet. There was a satisfaction that came from knowing I had come out on top, but beneath that satisfaction was a hollowness I hadn't expected. Revenge had been sweet, yes. But now that it was over, what was left? I had spent so much time planning her downfall that I hadn't thought about what came next. But I'd worry about that later. For now, I could live with the knowledge that I had won. Megan had tried to deceive me, but in the end, I had outplayed her at every turn. She was nothing but a memory now, and I was free. Free to rebuild my life on my own terms. In the days after the divorce, I thought I'd feel a sense of finality. Victory, even. And for a while, I did. Watching Megan pack up what little she had left was like the closing act of a performance I'd carefully orchestrated. She didn't say much, just moved through the house with hollow eyes and heavy steps. Every sound of tape ripping across boxes was a reminder of what she had lost. When she left for the last time, the door shut with a soft click, and the silence that followed was deafening. I should have felt triumphant, and for a brief moment, I did. I had won, hadn't I? I'd taken everything from her just like she had tried to take from me. But the emptiness that settled in afterward was unexpected. The house felt larger without her. Colder, even. I wandered through the rooms, half expecting to find her sitting on the couch, flipping through her phone, or cooking dinner in the kitchen like she used to. But the house was quiet, empty. Every trace of her was gone, and what was left behind was a life I wasn't sure how to fill. I went through the motions of my daily routine. Work was a distraction and a welcome one at that. My reputation as a lawyer remained intact, if not elevated. Colleagues congratulated me, some secretly admiring how I'd handled the situation. Smart move, they'd say, patting me on the back, as if life were just another legal case to win. But outside the office, things were different. Friends were awkward around me. Some were hesitant to invite me out, unsure if I wanted to talk about what had happened. Others whispered behind my back, speculating whether I'd truly moved on. And the worst part was, I didn't know the answer myself. One night, I came home late from work, the streetlights casting long shadows as I pulled into the driveway. The house was dark and lifeless, like it always was now. I stood at the front door for a moment, staring at it, thinking about how I used to feel relief when I came home. Now it felt like just another place to be. I poured myself a drink and sat in the living room, the glass cool in my hand. The quiet was unnerving. I had gotten what I wanted. Megan was out of my life, and she had paid the price for her betrayal. But now, sitting here alone, I wasn't sure what winning even meant. I sipped the whiskey slowly, feeling the warmth spread through me, but it didn't dull the thoughts swirling in my mind. How had it come to this? I had been a good husband, loyal, supportive, always there when she needed me. And yet, she had chosen to throw it all away for some fleeting affair with Sean. Maybe I was naive to think our marriage had been real. Maybe I had been too wrapped up in my own life to see the cracks forming. Or maybe I had just become the person I never wanted to be, calculating, ruthless, willing to destroy someone for the sake of pride. I leaned back on the couch, staring up at the ceiling, the whiskey glass empty in my hand. The house was still too quiet. Megan had taken the noise with her when she left. Weeks passed, and life continued its monotonous rhythm. Work, home, repeat. The victory of the divorce settlement faded into the background, becoming just another part of my history. I had moved on, at least, that's what I told myself. But the truth was harder to ignore. I kept tabs on Megan, not out of concern, but out of curiosity. It wasn't difficult, people talked, and news of her downfall spread fast. She had found a cheap apartment in a rundown part of town. No more fancy dinners, no more personal trainers, no more glamorous social circle. She had been cast out, left to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. Sean, predictably, had disappeared from the picture. As soon as the dust settled, he vanished, leaving Megan to fend for herself. It should have made me feel vindicated, knowing that she was alone now, just like I had been when she betrayed me. But instead, it left a bitter taste in my mouth. One evening, I decided to drive past her new apartment. I told myself it wasn't for any particular reason, just curiosity. But as I sat in the car, parked on the street outside the dingy building, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was off. This wasn't how it was supposed to feel. I had won, hadn't I? I saw her through the window. She was sitting at a small table, her head resting in her hands. There was no light in her eyes, no spark left in her. This was the woman I had once loved. The woman I had vowed to spend my life with. And now, she was a stranger to me. I should have been satisfied. I had done everything I set out to do. She was broken, her life in ruins. But as I watched her sitting there, alone in the dim light, I couldn't help but wonder if I had gone too far. The drive back home was long and quiet, the streetlights blurring as I passed by. I thought about everything, about the man I had become, about the choices I had made. Revenge had been sweet in the moment, but now it felt hollow. It hadn't fixed anything. It hadn't brought back the happiness I had lost. When I got home, I stood in front of the mirror for a long time, staring at the man reflected back at me. He was a stranger too. Cold, detached, calculating. This wasn't who I wanted to be. The next morning, I made a decision. I didn't want to be defined by this, by the divorce, by the revenge, by Megan's betrayal. I had spent too long living in the shadow of what she had done to me, and it had cost me more than I realized. It was time to let go. I called my lawyer that day and instructed him to make a few changes to the divorce settlement. Nothing drastic, just enough to ensure Megan wasn't left completely destitute. It wasn't about forgiveness, and it certainly wasn't about getting back together. But I couldn't live with the weight of knowing I had destroyed someone, even if they deserved it. It was time to move on, for real this time. Revenge had given me power, but it hadn't given me peace. And now, standing on the other side of it all, I realized that peace was the one thing I needed most. The rest of my life stretched out in front of me, waiting to be filled. I didn't know what came next, but I knew it wouldn't be defined by the mistakes of the past. It was time to start over. Starting over wasn't easy, but it was necessary. The decision to amend the divorce settlement had been met with mixed reactions from those who knew me. Some called it a sign of weakness, others saw it as a rare moment of compassion. But I didn't care what they thought. I wasn't doing it for them, or even for Megan. I was doing it for me. The revised terms were simple. Megan would keep a small portion of the assets, enough to get her back on her feet. Nothing extravagant, but enough to make sure she wasn't left completely in the gutter. It was more than she deserved, and I knew that. But something inside me couldn't stomach the idea of watching her suffer any longer. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe it was the realization that no amount of punishment would change what had already happened. Once the new terms were finalized, I didn't hear from Megan. I didn't expect to. We were done, officially and emotionally. Whatever life she chose to live from that point on was her own. I couldn't keep looking back. The house, though, was a different story. Every room felt like a reminder of what had been lost, and I found myself dreading coming home. The echoes of the past haunted the halls, and the emptiness was unbearable. So, I made another decision. I was going to sell the house. It had been ours once. But now, it was just a shell of memories I didn't want to carry anymore. I listed it with a real estate agent and began looking for a new place, something smaller, quieter, somewhere I could truly start over without the weight of my past staring me down every day. Moving out was bittersweet. I packed up my belongings methodically, going through the motions of sorting what I wanted to keep and what I could leave behind. It wasn't just about the physical objects, but about letting go of the emotional baggage too. I didn't need the reminders, the old photo albums, the souvenirs from trips we took. They belonged to a different version of me, a man who had believed in something that no longer existed. The day I handed over the keys, I stood outside the house for a long time, watching the sun dip below the horizon. It was strange, feeling a sense of loss for something I had chosen to leave. But at that moment, I knew it was the right choice. This chapter of my life was over, and it was time to close the book. I moved into a modest apartment downtown, close to work but far enough from the social circles I used to run in. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, and that was enough. I furnished it simply, avoiding the temptation to recreate the life I had with Megan. This was about rebuilding from the ground up, not clinging to the past. And for the first time in months, I felt a strange sense of peace. Settling into my new life was a gradual process. The apartment, though small, felt like a blank canvas, free from the weight of the past. It was liberating in a way I hadn't expected. No more rooms haunted by memories, no more traces of the life Megan and I had shared. Just me, starting fresh. I threw myself into work, not as a distraction this time, but as a way to focus on the future. My caseload picked up, and I found myself thriving in the courtroom, sharper than I had been in years. It felt good to reclaim that part of myself, the part that was confident, in control, and driven. The part that Megan's betrayal hadn't touched. But outside of work, I began to let myself breathe again. I started going out with friends, attending events, and even picking up old hobbies I hadn't touched in years. Photography had always been a passion of mine, something I'd let slip away during the marriage. Now, with no one to answer to, I bought myself a new camera and spent weekends exploring the city, capturing moments that felt meaningful in a way that life hadn't for a long time. One Saturday afternoon, I found myself at a local park, camera in hand, snapping photos of the autumn leaves as they turned vibrant shades of red and gold. It was peaceful, being out there alone, just me and the lens, no distractions. As I framed another shot, I heard a voice behind me. Beautiful, isn't it? I turned to see a woman standing a few feet away, watching the same tree I had been photographing. She was around my age, with warm brown eyes and a gentle smile. She wasn't dressed to impress, just jeans and a sweater, but there was something about her that caught my attention. It is, I replied, lowering the camera. Nature has a way of making everything look perfect. She smiled at that and moved a little closer, glancing at my camera. Are you a photographer? Not professionally, I said with a shrug. Just something I do for fun. I can tell. You've got an eye for it, she said, her voice sincere. I'm Emma, by the way. Ryan, I introduced myself, offering a handshake. For the next few minutes, we talked about photography, the park, and how autumn had always been her favorite season. There was an ease to the conversation, something I hadn't felt in a long time. No pretense, no pressure, just two people enjoying a simple moment in a park. We parted ways shortly after, but not before she gave me her number. It wasn't a date, not yet, but it was the first step toward something new. I wasn't sure where it would lead, and for the first time in a while, I wasn't in a rush to find out. Life had a way of surprising you, even when you thought you had everything figured out. As I walked back to my apartment that evening, I felt lighter than I had in months. Maybe this was what moving on really felt like. Not revenge, not bitterness, but the quiet hope that things could be different. Better, even. I glanced at the camera in my hand, feeling a sense of renewal. For the first time since everything with Megan had fallen apart, I felt like I was looking at the world through a new lens. It wasn't about erasing the past, it was about finding a way to move forward. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was ready to do just that. Life, I discovered, has a way of testing you when you think you've finally found balance. Just when I thought I had turned the page, a new wave of complications began to ripple through my carefully constructed life. It started small, rumors here and there. I'd overhear my colleagues mentioning Megan's name in passing, their voices hushed, but always just loud enough for me to catch. It wasn't until one of my partners, Frank, pulled me aside in the break room that I realized how far the rumors had spread. Ryan, have you seen this? He asked, holding up his phone. I frowned and shook my head. Seen what? He tapped on the screen a few times and then handed it to me. I stared down at the article in disbelief. It was an exposé of sorts, not a major news outlet, but some blog that thrived on sensationalism. The headline read, "From Trophy Wife to Ruin, the Untold Story of Megan's Fall from Grace." The article was filled with wild speculation and half-truths, detailing Megan's affair with Sean, the financial ruin she faced after the divorce, and my role in it all. It painted her as the victim, but not in a sympathetic way. It was more like a character assassination, reducing her to a cautionary tale about greed and infidelity. And somehow, I was caught in the middle of it. What the hell is this? I muttered, scrolling through the article. My stomach tightened with every sentence. Frank sighed, leaning against the counter. It's making the rounds. I thought you should know before it blows up any further. I handed the phone back to him, my jaw clenched. Why is this even news? We've been divorced for months. Who cares? It's the internet, Ryan. People love a good scandal. And with Megan being connected to someone as high profile as Sean, it was only a matter of time before something like this came out. I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache forming. This was the last thing I needed. I had worked hard to put everything behind me. And now it felt like the past was clawing its way back. What are you going to do? Frank asked, his voice concerned. I didn't have an answer for him. All I knew was that I didn't want to be dragged back into the drama. I had moved on, or at least I was trying to. But with the media circling like vultures, it felt like I was being pulled into a fight I didn't want to have. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at my phone as notifications from colleagues and friends buzzed with texts of concern. Some offered support, others were just curious to see how I'd react. Megan hadn't reached out, and neither had Sean. They were probably just as blindsided as I was. Part of me wanted to ignore it, let the noise fade on its own. But another part of me knew that silence could make things worse. If I didn't say something, the story would spiral out of control, and I'd be left with a reputation that wasn't mine. The next morning, I called my public relations team, something I never thought I'd had to do in my personal life. We crafted a statement, short and to the point. No dramatics, no blame. Just the facts. I released it on my social media platforms, hoping to quell the fire before it spread any further. The details of my divorce from Megan are personal and private. The recent stories circulating about our relationship are inaccurate and exaggerated. I have moved on from that chapter of my life, and I would appreciate the same courtesy from the public. It wasn't perfect, but it was all I was willing to say. I wasn't going to air more dirty laundry for the world to see. I had done enough damage already. But as the days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The article had opened a door I had closed, and now, the past was spilling out, piece by piece. Weeks passed, and though the media storm eventually quieted, the damage had been done. My name and Megan's were now linked in a way neither of us had anticipated, and it wasn't something that would fade away easily. I tried to go back to my normal routine, focusing on work and my photography, but the shadows of the past still lingered. One evening, as I was wrapping up a case file in my office, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer it, but something compelled me to pick up. Hello? There was a pause on the other end, and then a voice I hadn't heard in months. Ryan, it's Megan. I froze, the sound of her voice sending a wave of emotions through me: anger, confusion, maybe even a hint of nostalgia. But I kept my tone steady. What do you want, Megan? She hesitated, then sighed. I know you don't owe me anything. But we need to talk. I leaned back in my chair, pinching the bridge of my nose. About what? We're done. There's nothing left to say. I know, she said quickly. But this article, it's causing more problems than you realize. I've already made a statement. It's not my problem anymore. It is, Ryan, she insisted, her voice rising. Because they're not just dragging me through the mud, they're dragging you too. And I don't want that. Believe it or not, I don't want to see you go through this. I wasn't sure if I believed her. After everything that had happened, trust wasn't something that came easily. But there was something in her voice, a kind of desperation that I hadn't heard before. What exactly are you asking me for? I asked, my tone guarded. Meet with me, she said, her voice softening. Just once. We need to clear the air, for both our sakes. We can't keep pretending that all of this is behind us when it clearly isn't. I exhaled slowly, torn between hanging up and agreeing to meet her. Part of me wanted to walk away from this mess once and for all. But another part of me knew that maybe she was right. Maybe we needed to put an end to the lingering tension between us. Fine, I said after a long pause. One meeting. That's it. Thank you, she said, relief evident in her voice. I'll text you the details. After we hung up, I sat there for a moment, staring at my phone. I wasn't sure what I was walking into. But I knew that I couldn't avoid it forever. Megan had been a part of my life for years, and no matter how much I tried to move on, the past had a way of catching up with me. The next morning, I drove to the cafe Megan had chosen for our meeting. It was a small, quiet place on the outskirts of the city, far from the prying eyes of the media. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting at a table by the window, her fingers wrapped around a cup of coffee. She looked different, thinner, more tired. The confident woman I had once known seemed to have vanished, replaced by someone who had been through the ringer. I sat down across from her, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was heavy, filled with years of unspoken words. I'm not here to rehash everything, I said finally, breaking the tension. So just say what you need to say. Megan nodded, her eyes downcast. I know I've made mistakes, Ryan. I know I hurt you. And I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I stayed silent, waiting for her to continue. But what's happening now, it's out of control. The media won't leave it alone, and it's affecting my life in ways I never expected. I'm just asking for a chance to set the record straight. For both of us. I studied her for a moment, trying to gauge her sincerity. Maybe she was telling the truth, or maybe this was just another attempt to manipulate the situation. But something in her eyes told me that this time, she was genuinely trying to fix things. Okay, I said slowly. But this is the last time, Megan. After this, we're done for good. She nodded, a small, grateful smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Thank you, Ryan. I just want us both to be able to move on. As I left the cafe, I couldn't help but wonder if this meeting would finally close the door on the past, or if it would open up a new chapter I wasn't prepared for. Either way, one thing was certain, the past wasn't as easy to escape as I had once thought. I thought that meeting with Megan would offer closure, a chance to finally put everything behind us. But as I left the cafe, an unsettling feeling gnawed at me. I had underestimated her before, and even though she seemed broken, I couldn't shake the sense that something more was brewing beneath the surface. A few days passed without incident. The media storm around our names seemed to calm, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, we were done. Megan was right and we could finally move on, in our separate ways. Then, the letter arrived. It was a Friday morning when I found the envelope slipped under my office door. No return address, no markings, just my name scrawled across the front in handwriting I didn't recognize. I sat at my desk, staring at it for a minute, debating whether to open it at all. But curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a single piece of paper with a printed message. As I unfolded it, my heart began to race. Ryan, there are things you don't know. Things Megan never told you. Meet me at 7 p.m. tonight at the docks. Alone. S. Sean. That bastard. I crushed the paper in my hand. My mind racing. What the hell could he possibly want from me? What could he have to say that I didn't already know? Megan's affair, her lies, the mess she'd left behind. I thought I had the whole story. But if Sean was involved, it could only mean one thing, more deception. I debated whether to go at all. I could ignore it, leave it alone, and walk away like I'd promised myself I would. But something told me I needed to see this through. Maybe it was the lawyer in me, needing every last piece of the puzzle. Or maybe it was something darker, the part of me that wanted to see Sean squirm one last time. By 6:30 p.m., I found myself driving toward the docks, the sun setting behind me in a blaze of red and gold. The area was mostly deserted, the perfect place for a confrontation no one needed to witness. As I parked my car and stepped out into the cool evening air, the tension in my chest tightened. This felt like the final chapter, but I wasn't sure if I was ready for whatever would come next. I spotted Sean standing by the water, leaning against a rusted railing, his silhouette outlined against the fading light. He looked different from the last time I'd seen him, disheveled, almost desperate. Gone was the confident, charismatic personal trainer who had charmed Megan into betraying me. Now, he was just a man caught up in a situation spiraling out of control. As I approached, he turned to face me, his expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The sound of the waves lapping against the dock filled the silence between us. "You're here," he finally said, his voice rough. "You sent for me," I replied, my tone cold. "What do you want?" Sean exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I know you have every reason to hate me, Ryan. And I don't blame you. But this isn't just about Megan anymore." I narrowed my eyes, crossing my arms. "Cut the bullshit, Sean. What's this really about?" He hesitated, glancing around as if to make sure we were truly alone. Then, he stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Megan, she's in trouble." I scoffed, shaking my head. "Of course she is. And now it's my problem again, right?" "What kind of trouble?" "It's not what you think," he insisted. "This isn't just about the affair. It's about money. After you divorced her, she was desperate. She made some bad decisions. Got involved with some dangerous people." My pulse quickened, but I kept my voice steady. "And why should I care? She made her bed, Sean." "Because they're coming after her," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "And they won't stop until they get what they want. She doesn't have the money to pay them back." "Not my problem," I snapped, turning to leave. "Whatever mess Megan's gotten herself into, she can dig herself out of it." "You don't understand," he shouted, grabbing my arm. I turned, my fists clenching, but there was genuine fear in his eyes. "They're dangerous, Ryan. This isn't just about ruining her reputation. They'll hurt her, or worse." I yanked my arm free, stepping back. "And why should I trust you? You've lied to me before, Sean. Why should this time be any different?" He swallowed hard, his eyes pleading. "I know I don't deserve your trust. But I'm telling you the truth now. Megan's life is at stake. And if you don't help, it'll be on your conscience." I stared at him, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to walk away, to let Megan face the consequences of her actions. She had torn my life apart, and now she was paying the price. But another part of me, the part that had once loved her, couldn't ignore the danger she was in. "What do you want me to do?" I asked, my voice low. Sean let out a breath of relief, his shoulders sagging slightly. "There's a way to fix this. But it's going to take money. A lot of it. If we can pay them off, they'll leave her alone." I frowned, suspicion creeping back in. "And you expect me to bankroll this? After everything that's happened?" He shook his head. "Not just you. I'm in too. I've been saving up, but it's not enough. We need your help, Ryan. Please." I stood there, the weight of his words pressing down on me. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was life and death. And as much as I wanted to walk away, I knew I couldn't. Not if Megan's life was truly in danger. "Fine," I said after a long pause. "I'll help. But this is the last time, Sean. After this, I'm done. You, Megan, all of it. I don't want to hear from either of you ever again. He nodded, relief washing over his face. Thank you, Ryan. You have no idea how much this means. I didn't respond. I just turned and walked back to my car, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. I didn't trust Sean, and I didn't owe Megan anything. But if what he said was true, I couldn't just stand by and let her be destroyed. Not like this. As I drove away from the docks, the sun finally dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky dark and foreboding. And in that moment, I realized something: this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. I couldn't sleep that night. Sean's words echoed in my head, pulling me in different directions. Part of me screamed to let it go, to leave Megan to face the consequences of her own actions. But another part of me, the one that couldn't fully let go of the years we'd spent together, whispered that I had to see this through. If Sean was telling the truth, and Megan's life was in danger, I couldn't ignore it. I might have hated her for what she did, but I wasn't a monster. Morning came too quickly, and with it, a sense of dread that I couldn't shake. I knew what I had to do, but I didn't trust Sean. Something about the whole situation felt off, like there was more at play than he was telling me. If this was some kind of trap, I needed to be ready. I spent the day preparing. I made a few phone calls to old contacts, people who knew how to sniff out a scam, people who owed me favors. I wanted to know if there was any truth to what Sean had said, if Megan had really gotten herself tangled up with dangerous people. By late afternoon, the pieces started to fall into place. Megan had indeed been living beyond her means since the divorce. She'd racked up debts with some unsavory characters, people who didn't play by the rules. That night, I met Sean again, this time in a secluded parking lot near the edge of town. He looked worse than before, sweating, jittery, like he hadn't slept in days. Whatever was happening, it was taking its toll on him. Did you bring the money? He asked, his voice hoarse. I eyed him warily, keeping my distance. I brought part of it. I need proof that this isn't some kind of setup, Sean. I'm not stupid. He hesitated, then nodded. I understand. Look, I didn't want to do this, but I brought Megan with me. She's in the car. I froze. My pulse quickened as I glanced toward a nearby car, its windows tinted so dark I couldn't see inside. You brought her here? She didn't want to come, Sean said quickly. But I convinced her that this was the only way. She's scared, Ryan. Really scared. Please, just talk to her. You'll see I'm telling the truth. I didn't move at first, my instincts screaming that this was wrong. But curiosity, and maybe some misplaced sense of responsibility, got the better of me. Slowly, I walked toward the car, my heart pounding in my chest. Sean followed behind me, a nervous energy radiating off him. When I reached the car, I hesitated, then opened the back door. There, huddled in the backseat, was Megan. She looked like a shadow of the woman I used to know, her hair disheveled, her face pale and gaunt. Her eyes met mine, and for a brief moment, something flickered between us. It wasn't love. It wasn't forgiveness. It was something darker, an acknowledgement of the mess we'd both created. Megan, I said, my voice low, what the hell is going on? She didn't answer at first. Instead, she just stared at me, her lips trembling. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, I didn't mean for any of this to happen, Ryan. I made mistakes. Mistakes. That was putting it lightly. What kind of mistakes? I demanded. What are you involved in? She swallowed hard, her eyes darting nervously toward Sean, who was standing behind me, watching intently. I borrowed money, she said, her voice shaky. I thought I could pay it back, but it got out of control. These people, they're not the kind of people you can just walk away from. I clenched my fists, anger boiling beneath the surface. And you didn't think to tell me any of this? You've been playing games this whole time, and now you expect me to clean up your mess? Tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't moved. Not anymore. I didn't want you to know. She whispered. I didn't want you to think I was weak. Weak? She was beyond weak. She was reckless. And now, we were both caught in the fallout. So, what do you want me to do, Megan? I asked, my voice hard. You expect me to just hand over the money and pretend like this never happened? Sean stepped forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Ryan, we just need enough to get these people off her back. After that, we're out. You'll never hear from us again. I turned to face him, my patience wearing thin. And how'd I know you're telling the truth? For all I know, you and Megan could be in on this together, setting me up. Sean's face twisted in frustration. I'm not setting you up. I'm trying to fix this. Do you think I want to be involved in this mess? I'm doing this for her." His words hung in the air, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of sincerity in his eyes. But that didn't mean I trusted him. "I'll give you the money," I said slowly, "but we do this my way. I'm not just handing it over. We meet these people, face to face, and I'll make sure the deal goes through. No more surprises." Sean hesitated, then nodded. "Fine. Tomorrow night. I'll set it up." I glanced back at Megan, who was watching the exchange with wide eyes. I didn't know if she realized just how deep in trouble she was. But one thing was clear: I wasn't doing this for her. I was doing this to put an end to the whole nightmare, once and for all. "Be ready," I said, my voice cold. "Because after this, we're done." I turned and walked away, leaving them both standing in the dim light of the parking lot. My mind was spinning, a storm of conflicting emotions threatening to tear me apart. But one thing was certain: tomorrow would be the final move. And this time, I would be the one pulling the strings. The next day felt like walking through quicksand. Every hour dragged, but I knew tonight would be the endgame. I stayed in my office, going over the financial documents I had prepared weeks ago, the ones Megan had signed without hesitation. Thinking they were just part of our divorce settlement. Those papers were my ace in the hole. No matter how tonight played out, Megan would be left with nothing. By late afternoon, I got the message from Sean with the location: a warehouse on the outskirts of town. A place where shady deals could happen without attracting attention. Classic. It was a place where power could shift with the snap of fingers. I wasn't walking in there blindly, though. I had already made some calls, ensuring I had leverage in case things went south. As I pulled into the warehouse parking lot that evening, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving everything cast in shadow. My heart was racing, but my mind was calm, sharper than it had been in weeks. The place was quiet, too quiet, with only a few cars parked haphazardly around the entrance. Sean was already waiting by the side of the building when I stepped out of my car. He looked nervous, fidgeting with his hands, glancing around as if someone might jump out at him at any moment. "You ready?" I asked, my voice steady, though my muscles were taut with tension. He nodded quickly, too quickly. "They're inside. Everything's set. Megan's in there, too." I walked past him without another word. I was done with pleasantries. My only goal tonight was to end this once and for all. Inside the warehouse, the air smelled of dust and old machinery. Dim lights hung from the ceiling, casting long shadows across the floor. In the center of the room, there were 3 men standing around a table. Each of them looking like they belonged in a mobster movie, suits too expensive for their surroundings, eyes sharp, movements calculated. Megan was sitting on a chair nearby, her arms crossed, her face pale and tight with fear. Her eyes widened when she saw me walk in, but she didn't say anything. "Ryan," one of the men said, stepping forward. He had a thick, oily voice that matched his slicked back hair. "I'm Paul. Sean told me you're willing to help with Megan's little problem." I nodded, my face expressionless. "Let's cut the small talk. How much to make this go away?" Paul smirked, clearly enjoying the situation. 500,000. That clears her debt. 500,000. I expected as much. It was a steep price, but I could afford it. What they didn't know was that I had already set things in motion to ensure Megan couldn't get her hands on a dime of it. I walked over to the table and set down a black briefcase. "The money's in there, but we do this by the book. You get the money, and Megan's out of your life. No strings attached." Paul looked at me for a long moment, his smirk fading as he sensed something off. "You're a lawyer, right? You think you can just walk in here and dictate terms?" I met his gaze without flinching. "I know how people like you work. Take the money and leave, or this gets ugly." "I have no problem with ugly." There was a tense silence. Sean shifted nervously beside me, clearly hoping this wouldn't escalate. Megan sat frozen, her eyes darting between me and the men. For a second, I thought Paul might try something, but after what felt like an eternity, he broke into a grin. "You've got guts, lawyer," he said, opening the briefcase to check the cash. After a quick glance, he nodded to his men. "Deal's done. Megan's free." I turned to leave, but before I reached the door, Megan's voice stopped me. "Ryan, wait." I paused but didn't look back. "What?" She hesitated, her voice shaky. "Why did you do this? After everything?" I turned slowly, locking eyes with her for the first time in what felt like years. "I didn't do this for you, Megan. I did it to end this nightmare." Her face crumpled as if my words had physically hurt her. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I walked out of the warehouse, leaving her and Sean behind. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. The next morning, as I sat in my office sipping coffee, I received a call from my accountant. "Ryan, you're going to want to see this," he said, sounding unusually serious. "Check your email. I sent you the latest financial reports." I opened my inbox, expecting some minor updates. Instead, what I saw made my blood run cold. The reports showed that Megan had attempted to withdraw a large sum of money from a joint account we had long closed during the divorce proceedings. The thing was, she no longer had access to any funds. Everything was locked down in trusts and assets she couldn't touch without my permission. I smiled grimly. She had walked right into my trap. Later that day, Megan came storming into my office, her face red with rage. "What the hell is this, Ryan?" she spat, waving a copy of the financial documents I had sent her earlier. "You've frozen everything. You can't do this to me." I leaned back in my chair, completely calm. "Actually, I can. You signed everything, remember? That was part of the settlement. You gave up your rights to any of the assets when you agreed to the divorce terms. You have nothing." Megan, her face twisted in fury, her fists clenched at her sides. "You planned this all along, didn't you? You set me up." I stood, walking around my desk until I was standing right in front of her. "I warned you, Megan. I told you that there would be consequences. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them." She looked like she was about to slap me, but instead, she collapsed into the chair behind her, burying her face in her hands. "I can't believe you'd do this to me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You did this to yourself," I said coldly. The next few days were a blur of legal maneuvers and media fallout. Word quickly spread that Megan had been left with nothing after our divorce, her reputation in tatters. Sean, the man she had betrayed me for, was nowhere to be found. I had heard rumors that he had left town, probably running from the same people I had paid off. As for Megan, she tried to fight back, hiring lawyers to challenge the divorce settlement. But it was no use. Every document had been airtight, every signature accounted for. In the end, she was left with nothing. I should have felt victorious, but as I stood in the living room of my now empty house, I realized that revenge hadn't brought me the satisfaction I had hoped for. The life I had built with Megan was gone, and no amount of money or legal victories could change that. I had won, but at what cost? Looking out the window at the city below, I felt an overwhelming sense of emptiness. There was nothing left for me here. Megan's fall had been inevitable, but now that it had happened, I wasn't sure what to do next. Maybe it was time to start over. Far away from the memories, the betrayal, the wreckage of my marriage. I had won the battle, but the war had cost me everything. The house was quiet now. Too quiet. For years, it had been filled with noise, Megan's voice echoing through the halls, the soft sounds of her movements, the occasional laughter that once seemed so natural. Now, there was only silence, the kind that seeped into every corner, reminding me that I was finally alone. The media frenzy had died down. Megan's fall from grace had been swift and brutal, but the world moved on. People had short memories. For all her scheming, she was just another footnote in a world filled with scandal. Sean had disappeared, and as far as I knew, Megan was living in a small apartment downtown, struggling to make ends meet. The woman who had once been the center of my life was now just another casualty of her own ambitions. I hadn't heard from her since that last confrontation in my office. Part of me had expected her to fight harder, to come back swinging, but the legal battle had taken everything from her. She was smart enough to know when she'd lost. Sitting in my living room, I stared at the stack of papers on the coffee table. They were everything I had worked for, the financial documents that proved my victory, the evidence that Megan had signed away her rights, the papers that confirmed her downfall. It was all there, neatly tied up, a testament to my patience and planning. But as I looked at them now, I didn't feel the triumph I had expected. I had won the game and played it perfectly, but in the end, it didn't matter. Megan was gone, and with her, the life I thought I'd wanted. I stood and walked over to the window, staring out at the city below. The sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow over the skyline. It should have been beautiful, but all I saw was the emptiness that had replaced everything I'd once cared about. Maybe this was what winning felt like, hollow. I had no more fights left in me. The war was over, and I had emerged the victor, but at what cost? The love I had once felt for Megan had turned to ashes, burned away by betrayal, by bitterness, by the slow unraveling of everything we had built together. She had been my world, and in trying to destroy her, I had destroyed myself in the process. I needed to leave. This city, this house, this life, it all felt suffocating now, a constant reminder of what had been lost. I had more money than I knew what to do with, and nothing holding me back. It was time to start over, to leave the past behind and find something new. Maybe somewhere far away, where no one knew my name, where I could disappear into the anonymity I now craved. I grabbed a suitcase and started packing. I didn't need much, just the essentials, a few clothes, my passport, and enough cash to last me until I figured out where I was going. I didn't have a destination in mind yet, but that didn't matter. I just needed to go. To leave this place and everything it represented behind me. As I zipped up the suitcase, I glanced at the stack of papers on the table one last time. They were my trophies, proof of my victory, but I didn't need them anymore. I had spent too long playing that game, too long letting it define me. Now, it was time to let it go. Without another thought, I picked up the stack of papers and tossed them into the fireplace. The flames caught quickly, curling the edges of the documents, and turning them to ash. I watched as the fire consumed everything, the final remnants of the life I had known burning away in front of me. When the last of the papers had turned to embers, I grabbed my suitcase and walked out the door, leaving the house behind. I didn't look back. Outside, the air was cool, the streets quiet. I walked down the driveway, my steps feeling lighter with each passing moment. The city stretched out before me, a maze of possibilities, of new beginnings. As I got into the car and started the engine, I felt something shift inside me. The weight I had been carrying for so long began to lift, piece by piece, until all that remained was the open road ahead. I didn't know where it would lead me, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to find out. And so, I drove. Away from the memories, the pain, the betrayal. Away from the life that had defined me for too long. I didn't know what the future held, but whatever it was, it would be mine.